Hi, welcome back to IMSLP's Practice Room Breaks. I'm your host, Natalie. Follow me. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Steinway & Sons and Steinway's flagship showroom in New York City, Steinway Hall, for hosting this program. Steinway has been the maker of the world's finest pianos since 1853 and has inspired a generation of artists with unmatched innovation, artistry, and sound. Thank you so much. Let's get started. Today I am here with one of the most incredible and sought after cellists on stages today, Zlatomir Fung. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me.
Here's a little bit more about Zlatomir.
Cellist Zlatomir Fung burst onto the scene as the youngest musician ever and the first American in 4 decades to win first prize at the International Tchaikovsky Cello Competition. Since then, he's become one of the leading cellists of his generation, performing with major orchestras like the New York Philharmonic, the Cleveland Orchestra, and the London Philharmonic, among many others, and appearing at top festivals from Aspen to Verbier. This past season, he's been touring internationally, performing the complete Bach cello suites and releasing his debut album on Signum Records, a collection of opera fantasies and transcriptions that shows off his curiosity and range. We will be discussing this album in the interview. A Juilliard graduate and now professor of cello at Juilliard and an Avery Fisher Career Grant winner, he's known for both staggering technique and a fearless imaginative repertoire. Zlatomir performs on 2 extraordinary instruments, a 1735 Montagnana and a 1696 Stradivarius.
What is your earliest memory of the cello?
I think my earliest memory of the cello is probably my first concert, my first recital, in quotation marks, which I think happened when I was maybe 4 years old. And the performance was, I had my cello in my hand, I got on stage, I was being accompanied by my teacher, my cello teacher at the piano. I kind of took a bow, sat down, and then she played like a cadential thing, like bum, bum, ba-dum. Okay. And then I stood up and took a bow. And I didn't play anything, The first concert was just taking a bow, being on stage for 5 seconds.
Wow.
Acknowledging the audience again and then leaving.
Well, that's important. You have to learn stage presence, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. You started in Suzuki method, right?
Yes.
What from the Suzuki method do you feel still stays in your playing and teaching today, if anything?
I think the great strength of the Suzuki method is the emphasis on music as a language that we absorb through our listening rather than our looking. Okay. Because you learn how to play by ear before you learn how to read music.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways, what we try to do at all levels of playing music is we try to replicate a kind of sensibility and feeling that we have inside that's not actually possible to fully articulate on the page.
Yeah.
So understanding that the music actually exists in this abstraction, in this ether that's emotional and elusive, and that's actually what we're going to try to achieve in our playing rather than what's printed on the page, I think is a great lesson that I still carry with me and try to espouse in my teaching as well.
Beautiful. So the music exists beyond the page, always, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
You grew up in a household of mathematicians. First of all, what type of math? I'm probably gonna be intimidated, but what kind of, I'm so curious.
So both my parents actually, they did study pure mathematics.
Okay.
I never made it past trigonometry, so the stuff that they studied, I think my mother her specialty was Lie algebras, and my father was Springer fibers and Kazhdan-Lustig theory. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but anyway, stuff that is way beyond my comprehension.
Okay.
They both kind of moved away from like research mathematics.
Okay.
And now my mother is a math professor, and my father is he's a programmer who works for Google.
How, if so, has growing up in a family of mathematicians surrounded by this type of thinking influenced the way that you understand music, if at all?
Problem solving, I would
Okay.
say, is the big thing. And I
Yeah.
feel like in music also there's a lot of problem solving as a player, especially, you know, because we often have an idea that we want, and then to execute it, there are all sorts of obstacles physically in our relationship with the instrument, and finding a way to overcome that is sort of an analytical process for me often. So I would say that's the biggest influence.
How does that tie into what you said earlier from the Suzuki method about listening being the most important thing? Do you think there's something analytical behind that?
I think there can be. You know,
Okay.
I think one of the reasons why classical music is so beautiful and amazing is because it is this kind of synthesis of emotion and intellect.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite composers, I think, really have that in their music. Like, for example, one of my favorite composers is Johannes Brahms.
Okay.
And I feel like his sensibility of, you know, his understanding of structure is so prevalent in his music, but it always comes out in a very emotional way.
Right.
And so as a listener, when you're hearing a piece of his, you can appreciate it on a pure emotional level and just let it wash over you.
Yeah.
But then you can also appreciate it aesthetically as kind of a structured idea, you know, in the way that he's dealing with motives and themes and the way they interlap, the way they overlap and interact. And so for me, like, the appreciation of both those things at the same time is what makes music really incredible. Like,
Yeah.
really a pinnacle of like what humans can do creatively and artistically.
Incredible. I can't think of another form of performing art that has that marriage between analysis and emotion in this way. That's gorgeous. In 2019, at the age of 20, by the way, you became the youngest ever winner of the Tchaikovsky International Cello Competition. I think all of us would be curious to know, what was your preparation process like? You know, from repertoire choices to managing risk-taking to developing the stamina to get through rounds like that in a competition.
So that experience was really formative in, you know, for my own personal relationship to like preparation and repertoire management, because it was so much repertoire. I mean, for cellists, it's a lot, 2.5 hours. I know pianists have a different standard of what a lot of repertoire means, but
Some concertos are 2.5 hours.
and you know, I feel like I was preparing for it for 6 months, although I wasn't explicitly preparing for it. But a lot of the repertoire that I played in the competition ultimately was stuff that I had been performing in recitals in the 6 months prior.
Okay.
So I had experience with some of the pieces that I played, like the Brahms E minor cello sonata and the Berio sequenza, which I'd played like 5 or 6 times in the preceding months, and that gave me a lot of comfort when I actually was up there, because it felt familiar.
Yeah.
But in the month before the competition itself, I really just hunkered down and was practicing a lot. It was probably the most I've ever practiced in my life.
Okay.
And I just remember, it was just being a lot of, you know, just absorption of like, you know, constant being in the music. Like, if I wasn't practicing, I was listening, you know, trying to shore up my memorization of the new pieces that I didn't know so well.
Okay.
And then a few days before I left for the competition, I also did a couple like local run-through recitals for some of my colleagues and friends in the community, like where I was living.
Okay.
So that was really helpful too.
Did you ever ask yourself if you felt the need to adjust your style of playing to the taste of judges, or did you really kind of stay true to your own style, no matter what it would look like on stage to judges?
I think for the most part, I've always tried to play in a way that I felt was a way that I wanted the music to be played, you know. So I think in many ways, I was extremely lucky in competitions, because I think it happened to be the case that my taste, however you might describe it, tends to be less controversial or less opposed by a certain number of people than some other people's taste or sensibility. And I think that is kind of perhaps, for better or for worse, one of the things that you might need to have competition success is a kind of diplomacy in your playing, and I don't intentionally have that. Like I never thought like, oh, I'm gonna make this rounder or less offensive than I want it to be. Sure. That's just the way that I hear it. That's the way that I want it to be played. So that was always my guiding principle. And I think, as I was saying, I think it was very fortunate for me that I had that success in those situations.
When you say diplomacy, the word diplomacy and performing the cello doesn't quite click maybe for our viewers. I find it fascinating, and I would love for you to expand on that, because I think I know what you're talking about, but...
Yeah, maybe that wasn't the best choice of words, but I guess what I was trying to get at is like the feeling that when you're playing, I feel like a lot of performers, especially those who cause controversy, their playing goes very, very far in a certain direction. And often it's because they have an incredible conviction about the way that they want something to be played. Right. But I feel like, when we're playing with music, it's kind of like a circle, right? And we have like all these different things on the edge of the circle that we're trying to manage to create this whole. Yeah. And when you really go far in one direction, you do, by nature of it, have to move away from other things, like on the other side of that circle.
Sure, yeah.
And so people who are listening for those other things are really going to miss them in your playing if you're going very far. Like, for example, like if you're someone who loves a very specific fast kind of vibrato or whatever, or a very electric way of using the bow, like you might have a lot of energy and a kinetic feeling to your playing. But then some people might object and say, well, where's the introspection? Where's the the poetry or whatever? They might feel it's too athletic, or vice versa, right? So I think by diplomacy I mean like being able to balance the needs of the music and finding it like knowing where you are at any given moment in the passage and how it relates to your natural inclination. Which I think also relates to one of my other general thoughts about being a player, which is maybe something we can discuss more later, but there's sort of two schools of thought about what the role of a player is. One is like, should you hear the player? Like, should the personality of the player be present in the performance? Or should the player just be a vehicle for the music, right? And I think the answer to that, I think one, depends a lot on the listener and the listener's relationship with the piece of music. Because like, for example, if I'm listening to a piece that I've never heard before, I don't necessarily want the most off-the-wall performance, right? Because I want to actually understand what the piece is trying to do before I, feel like this is a great interpretation of this piece that brings something new to it. But if it's a piece that I've heard 1,000 times, then to have something really, really new brought to it is really refreshing, because I'm used to hearing the piece and I know how the piece goes, So I think that's kind of the tension sometimes in competitions and in general in music. And my musical philosophy is much more toward try to be a vehicle for the music, to adapt your playing, to adapt the extremes of your playing based on what the composer is asking of you. Try to eliminate your presence as a player, your voice as a player, sort of as much as you can.
Where for you does composer intent end and performer authorship begin?
I mean, I think it's a great question, and it really depends on the composer, I would say. I mean, it's so hard to know with many of the composers who are no longer with us, like what their own relationship was with the finished product of their music. Hate to call it a product. The finished artistic culmination of their, whatever.
Birth.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like a living thing, yeah.
I can imagine that a lot of composers who had a very tumultuous process likely still had doubts at the end when they finally, went to print with their first publisher or whatever about specifics. Maybe even about more than specifics. Maybe they eventually would feel that there were entire sections that weren't working, or whatnot. And these are things that as performers, we're often taught to not think about, because we're taught to have the text be, holy and incorruptible, which I think is part of the beauty of the classical music tradition, because that's what distinguishes it from a lot of other musical traditions, the fact that there is this kind of fidelity to the composer's intentions, and there's a specificity to the way that composers describe their intentions in the way that they write music down. But I feel like there is always an element of like, when a piece is written, it no longer really belongs to you, and it's like, I've seen commercials on TV where people use the Four Seasons for like, Audi cars and stuff, and it's like, I don't know how Vivaldi would feel about that, but it's like, he can't do anything about it, because that piece exists, it's in the public domain, it belongs to the world, it doesn't belong to him. And so the perspective I also like to bring is, I'm now composing more. I used to compose when I was a teenager, and I kind of got back into it recently. And I feel very much that like the things that I write, I think it's great if they're changed. I think it's great if I mess up. I like to have a kind of a fluid relationship, because I'm also a performer, and I know that it's hard to always get things right. And even if when you practice as much as you possibly can, you still only get 30% of what you were hoping to do. And all these things that humanize that relationship between composer and performer. And I think that's also maybe why some of my favorite composers were so performer-oriented. Like Chopin, I think, is one of my favorite composers, and such a brilliant example of how, instrumental ability and compositional brilliance were actually the same thing for him. That it was because he had so much facility that he was able to expand artistically in his music. So.
Yeah, I mean, the music, as we were saying, when you said product, we were like, no, it's a living thing. It's like you give birth to something, you give birth to a child, and they grow up, and they're their own person. You have influence over them, but it's their life. And yeah, I have the same perspective. I'd love to discuss your debut album, Fantasies.
Sure.
I find it really interesting that you juxtapose these 19th century opera transcriptions with fairly contemporary works. And where do you find the thread between them? Why did you do that, and where is the thread between these works that span centuries?
So my first album, Fantasies, the inspiration behind it was actually my love for cello technique and the affinity I feel for the composers, particularly those in the 19th century who were virtuoso cellists and also wrote for cello. So people like David Popper and Piatti, Servet, who's featured on the album. These are people who are best known today for their technical exercises, things that I would assign my students to work on to improve. But they also wrote a lot of concert music, and they were all very accomplished performing musicians. And the thing that most interested me about this repertoire, and actually kind of connects to the discussion we were just having about composer intent and authorship and all this, is that in a lot of the virtuoso music that they wrote, the relationship between them and the music is kind of different. It's like they're actually more important than the music. They're the star of the show. The music is a vehicle for them to be, to show off their chops, their stuff. And so they would write these very demanding fantasies that would allow them to explore new techniques and also showcase their preferences, like artistically, because like if they, for example, were doing a set of variations on a melody, then they would have like one variation be artificial harmonics, and maybe they were particularly good at that, better than their colleagues, so they wanted an opportunity to show that off to the world, and so that tradition kind of faded. It's kind of faded with, with the whole tradition of performers also being composers, which sort of ended at the dawn of the recording era, unfortunately. And so by having these two like contemporary fantasies, including one that I had made an arrangement of Leo Janacek's Janufa, I wanted to sort of experiment to see how it would feel to to make something that felt like my own technical vehicle. So to include things in it that I felt like I could do well, you know, and that I would enjoy playing. So it was kind of in a way, a real like passion project just for me, you know. And I kind of made the album with the assumption that no one would listen to it except cellists. And I think probably that's been proven right, but I still really enjoyed making it, and I'm proud of it, so.
That's great. I think more people are going to listen to it now. So you said that you wanted to showcase your technique in something that you like playing. Can you describe that process of transcribing?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the first thing is like you when you're transcribing someone else's music, you always try to choose parts of the music that you enjoy,
yes,
which is great, you know, and that was a big thing for me in that fantasy. Like I didn't want there to be a single moment where it wasn't music that I loved. Okay. And so then it was a matter of finding the music that I loved that I also felt would sound decent in my hands, you know. And I've always felt that I'm more of an introspective player, like that I like playing more lyrical, singing, you know, this kind of stuff, as opposed to like the technical virtuosity. Right. So I tried to have kind of a little bit more of a balance toward that in the piece. Yeah, and it was fun to tinker with it and finally come up with like a 50-minute piece that I feel like has a nice range of, you know, virtuosity and lyricism and all that.
Do you think that what you're describing, you know, writing for yourself and showcasing your technique just like Popper did, do you think that sort of steps away from what we were discussing? Or if not, how is it connected to what we were discussing? I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
I think it's fundamentally a different kind of performer experience, you know, also for the audience too. Yeah. Because like when I'm playing that piece, I think it's pretty clear that I'm supposed to be the star of the show and not the music, you know?
Right, yeah. I mean, as you should.
Right, and you know, when you play a Beethoven sonata, you know, regardless of how wonderfully you might be playing it, the Beethoven is still the core of what you're doing, because that piece is, you know, those pieces are, they're about some essence, you know, that's higher than just playing the instrument, right? But at the same time, like, we spend so much time playing the instrument that sometimes it's nice to glorify that, you know?
Yeah,
like,
of course. I mean, it's a gorgeous instrument. You have a gorgeous instrument. Why not celebrate that? I completely agree. Yeah, great answer.
I should also mention that one of the fantasies featured on the album by this quite obscure French cellist conductor from the 19th century, François-Georges Einel, was actually a piece that I found on IMSLP. And I was looking for opera fantasies, because actually, you know, IMSLP's search function is amazing. You can type in like cello opera fantasies with piano, and like there'll be a bunch of stuff that will come up. There was all sorts of stuff from the 19th century that I was totally unaware of. And this one I found really interesting because it was a fantasy on William Tell, which is an opera that I really enjoy. But funnily enough, it has absolutely no quotations from the overture of William Tell.
Oh.
So it has like themes and exploration of like other parts of because the opera's like 4.5 hours long. And
okay,
all this
well,
other stuff.
Longer than all the cello repertoire.
Yeah, right. And so I ended up recording it, and I think it was actually the first commercial recording ever released of that piece. And that score was all thanks to IMSLP.
Wow, so IMSLP's sources and features really did shape the process of your album.
Absolutely.
Wow.
There was another piece on the album that I also found on IMSLP, which is the arrangement of Lenski's aria from Eugene Onegin.
Oh, that's my favorite aria of all. That's my favorite piece of all time.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that piece.
So I found that, you know, I think Bukinik had an arrangement that someone had uploaded for cello and piano.
I'm gonna cry. Yeah. We should play it. Can you tell me if you had a recent program pairing that maybe seemed a little risky on paper but really worked well in the hall?
Well, you know, the way I like to program is I find that it's important to have different kinds of flavors, like back to back, like kind of like a nice multi-course meal. Yes. Like you don't want too much sour like all at once. You want sour, salty, you know, then tangy, whatever. So I mean, one thing that I'm thinking of recently is, like, speaking of the Eugene Onegin, I programmed that Lenski's aria alongside another transcription that I did of the love scene from the score for Vertigo by Bernard Herrmann.
Love that movie.
Yeah,
Great movie.
and the score is incredible.
Yes.
And so I did that 5-minute transcription and then the Lenski, and
Oh, wow.
that kind of felt just like something natural to do, because there were two shorter transcriptions.
Sure.
And it ended up being the case that actually after the concert, there was a fellow in the audience who came up to me and he explained that he was doing his PhD research on Bernard Herrmann, and his whole argument was that the score from Vertigo was actually most inspired by Eugene Onegin.
No way.
Which I found fascinating, because that was something that I hadn't thought of at all.
Wow.
But so it was just interesting that that's what I like to try to create programs that have interesting connections that kind of lie beneath the surface.
That's such serendipity that person was there, by the way.
I know.
What a program pairing, by the way. I wish I was there.
Thanks.
One of my favorite movies, and genuinely one of my favorite pieces of all time. Do you like sort of planting an encore at the end of a program to sort of complete the arc, like a coda, or do you rather do something that sort of punctures the program, like a little comedic relief or a combination of both? What's your strategy there?
I wish I had a more strategic approach to it, but really it's just a question of, what does the pianist know? What are they willing to learn?
That's so true.
What am I able to play without practicing?
So true. Guilty.
But my general rule of thumb is that shorter is better.
Okay.
Because I think it really should just be like a treat, like a little candy.
Yeah.
And it's nice when it's a piece that is maybe lesser known.
Sure. Okay.
Like one of my favorite encores to play is a transcription of this song by Rimsky-Korsakov called "The Nightingale Captivated by the Rose."
Ooh.
And it's just about 2 minutes, and it works beautifully on the cello with piano.
Yeah.
And the biggest advantage of it is not that it's beautiful, but it's that the piano part is literally sight readable. And I have that proven with at least 4 different pianists that I've given to it, and they've read it flawlessly on first read through.
Pianists love you. That's great. Yeah. I'm sure the piece is beautiful, but nice. Those violinists that are like, can you learn Strauss Sonata in 3 days?
Right.
No, hello, how are you? Just learn it. Besides playing the cello, I hear you are an incredible chess player.
I'm okay. I'm not as good as the rumors might suggest.
Well, you're better than me. Do you ever find that one informs the other? Where do chess and cello maybe intersect for you, like pattern management, risk taking? I
think there are a couple of really interesting parallels. I mean, one is that, of course, as you said, pattern recognition is a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And I actually feel like, they did this very interesting study with chess players and non-chess players where it was about position memorization, right? Okay. I don't know if you heard the study, but they would show a beginner, intermediate, and then a grandmaster the same position. Okay. And they would see how much each player could recreate after looking at it for 5 seconds. Okay, wow. And usually the beginner could recreate 2 pieces, 3 pieces. Sure. Intermediate could create half the board, and the grandmaster could flawlessly create the whole board. Mm-hmm. But then they showed the board with a position that was just random, something that could have never occurred in the game, with 2 kings touching each other on adjacent squares. Yeah. And the grandmasters actually performed just as poorly as the beginners.
Wow.
And so it goes to show that for them, it was all about the way that they were structuring the input of information as things that they could recall and remember. And for me, I think there's a great parallel to actually being a player, and perhaps you feel this the same way as a pianist. I can imagine maybe it's even more so on piano because of the visual nature of it and the equidistant quality of the different octaves. But when you see a passage, you sort of, all the light bulbs go off about the fingerings that could work, right?
Yes.
And you sort of see structures, you see harmony, you see finger patterns that would not occur to other people who don't have as much experience.
I do, yeah.
But then on cello, for example, if you were to give me a chord that's unplayable, like I wouldn't find a way to conceive of that chord better than someone else. You know, it's only the stuff that is playable, that fits within the hand, that fits within the patterns we know.
Yeah.
It's actually not random, you know, and that's the pattern recognition. So I think that's kind of one major similarity, like the importance of that, and also starting from an early age to achieve a high level of that kind of intuitive pattern recognition.
When you said that pianists maybe experience that level of pattern recognition, Bach seems like a really almost perfect landscape to explore something like this. You know, I mean, for piano, Bach fugues are just towering and challenging and fascinating, mathematical, and obviously a lot of pattern recognition. What about the cello suites? Do you find that there's that similar level of pattern recognition there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, Bach created a lot of different new patterns for the cello with the suites, because, you know, we're working with a much more limited group of possibilities in terms of polyphony. You know, there are only so many chords in the first four positions that work in diatonic harmony, you know, on the cello, like physically. So Bach is using those in many different ways and kind of getting around those in many different ways. And it's interesting to see how he manages them in the different keys, you know, because we have 6 different keys for the 6 suites.
I'm a pianist, but I do know that the world does not possess Bach's original manuscripts for his cello suites. They've been lost to time. Some copies have been written out by Anna Magdalena, Johann Kellner, others. But to my knowledge, these copies don't really agree in terms of bowings and markings. I'm curious your thoughts on that, and if you've, you know, changed your bowings and articulations to fit a certain copy based on your preferences. Just curious about that.
Yeah, so I think, you know, these 4 sources that we have are really interesting to compare. And actually, on IMSLP, there's, I don't know who it was, some incredible, generous soul that uploaded like a modern engraving of the 4 different sources, all compared, like line by line.
Incredible.
So you can see the differences like on the same document, which is truly amazing, and it's up there for free. So another reason why IMSLP is so amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, anonymous person.
Yeah, and I always tell my students to look at that because it's the most interesting, you know, edifying thing to see the discrepancies. And you know, my feeling about it is that probably all of them have some amount of error. All of them are different in some ways. But also, particularly the 2 anonymous sources, which are often thought of as less authoritative because they don't really have a clear, you know, reasoning behind their existence, right? Other than perhaps, you know, for the musicological training of the person who was copying them out.
Yeah.
I find them to actually be the most interesting because they were made a little bit later, you know, after Bach's death, and I think they represent how a performer of that time would have done bowings for this kind of music.
Okay.
You know, and so you see a lot more. You see in those 2 more generosity in the way that they're using slurs and like longer slurs and things that seem more natural to us as players. And that kind of gives me reason to believe that you know, if a player of that era who is so much more connected to this whole lineage that Bach was actually a part of and living in his time, would have had these thoughts about, like, you know, it's much easier, it's much better to slur all these notes instead of doing this complicated bowing that Anna Magdalena wrote or whatever, then why shouldn't we, you know, as players? And I think, again, it goes back to one of my beliefs, which is that, like, if it sounds better, why not do it, right? So, you know, and I think the composer would agree for the most part, like that they want the best outcome for the music. So if a bowing makes you sound like you're playing is belabored or too, you know, fussy or whatever, which it can very easily end up being, then I think it's better just to do something simple and make it natural.
Beautiful. This really ties back to what we were talking about with composer authorship and intent, and it's, you know, Bach was so innovative for his time. Actually, if you didn't know, Stephen Isserlis recorded the prelude from the first Bach cello suite with several different bowings from several different sources. You can actually find that on YouTube, so check it out. I think this is a great segue into our fun interlude that you've prepared for us today with the Dvorak Cello Concerto, and it's going to be such a treat. So here it is.
I wanted to briefly highlight a couple of interesting discrepancies between two of the most important primary sources of the Dvorak Cello Concerto. The two sources that I'll be comparing are the autograph manuscript and the first edition of the piano reduction, which is another important source. So here are three interesting moments in the first movement that highlight the differences between these two sources. The first is near the beginning of the cello entrance in this passage. In the autograph manuscript, the second chord in that series of 5 chords is played with the notes F sharp, D sharp, B, whereas in the first edition piano reduction, the chord is G natural, D sharp, B. Additionally, there are a couple of other differences. In the autograph manuscript, all 4 chords in that measure have carets, indicating a harsher articulation, in addition to the sforzandos. The first 2 have the indication that they should be rolled, whereas in the piano reduction, all 4 are indicated to be rolled. So I'll show you the difference. And this would be the first edition piano reduction version. So you can see it's a subtle difference, but it's interesting nonetheless to see Dvorak's thought process as he was contemplating these differences. Another very interesting spot happens in the second theme of the first movement, in this passage. In the autograph manuscript, the dynamics here indicate a series of hairpins leading to the conclusion of the phrase, which sounds like this. On the other hand, in the first edition piano reduction, Dvorak asks for the solo player to come down first in the phrase and then reignite the intensity of the crescendo. Additionally, he puts the marking animato, indicating that there should be a slightly faster tempo immediately at this moment. So the phrase ends up sounding more like this. So again, a subtle difference, but very interesting glimpse into Dvorak's thought process about how to conclude this very emotional and beautiful phrase. Finally, in the development section of the first movement, we have one of the most fascinating discrepancies. When the cello enters with a beautiful new theme, in the autograph manuscript, Dvorak asks for the marking mezzo forte, molto espressivo. That would sound like this. Something like that, a pretty forthright dynamic. On the other hand, in the piano reduction first edition, the marking is pianissimo, so a very different character, perhaps more tender and vulnerable. So quite a divergence in the conception of the phrase there, and it's very interesting to think about how Dvorak was deciding between those two.
You joined the Juilliard faculty. This is your second year. I'm so curious, how does it feel being in your 20s on the Juilliard faculty?
You know, it feels like a tremendous honor,
right?
Obviously, and you know, beyond that, it's also a great deal of fun. You know, it's I've always enjoyed teaching, when I've had the opportunity to give master classes before, and I had private students also during the pandemic and so forth. And for me, it's actually maybe going back to that whole concept of problem solving. I love the problem solving of working with someone on a piece of music or on their playing.
Yeah.
And the one-on-one connection is really interesting and enriching, I think. So it's been a great first year, and now in the middle of my second year, and I have some new students, and it's just really exciting to see their growth and yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Day one with a new student. What's that lesson like?
If it's a student that I've never worked with before on a private level, then it'll be a lot of discussion about their goals, what they feel they need to work on in their playing, and then quite a bit of scales.
Okay.
My general approach to playing the cello is that everything we do technically is like the equivalent of a poet's vocabulary, and no matter how great of a poet you are inside, no matter how deeply you feel what you want to express through your poetry, if you're constantly having to look in the thesaurus for the words that you want to express, then your poetry will never flow out of you, And so that's why I place a great emphasis on technical enrichment, because I feel like that's our vocabulary, that's what we work with. And then when the moment comes for the inspiration, we have it all to draw upon.
That analogy, I've never heard it before, and it might be perhaps the most fitting analogy for learning an instrument. It's so true. In terms of technique and establishing that vocabulary, are there, studio staples that you have that you want every student to cycle through?
I think that the only real staples probably are the 40 pauper etudes.
Okay.
I think it's important that everyone plays all of those at some point. There are different levels to which you can engage with it. You can play them through a couple times. You can work on one for 2 months, but each of them has a point, and I think a very important point for an advanced cellist. Then, of course, the Bach suites, and then some of the standard repertoire from the concertos also teaches you things that are important. And then also in our literature, there's a lot of other stuff that I think it's important that cellists play at least a little bit, like Haydn quartets. I'm trying to think of other stuff, all that kind of stuff, but of course the Beethoven chamber music and the Brahms chamber music, because there's certain things in there that, even the simple thing like, in a Haydn quartet, you'll often play like bop, 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 back and forth. But you'd be surprised, actually, there are a lot of people who come to Juilliard who are, I would describe them as a little bit deficient in just playing that simple stroke,
Interesting.
And I mean, obviously they can play it, but maybe not at the highest possible level, right?
Sure.
So, and we're always trying to go for the highest possible level.
Of course. Imagine you had yourself in your studio, young Zlatomir. What would you want to instill in your younger self? What would you want your students to internalize in that same line of thinking?
I think probably the most important thing that I tell myself and anyone else is that the journey of one's relationship with the instrument and one's relationship with one's playing is never linear.
Yeah.
And I also do believe that it's, the times when you don't play as well as you can, they actually give you appreciation for when you do play your best.
Yes.
And you can't always be at your best, because then it's not your best, right? Then it's just your normal, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. You need a bar.
And I also try to instill this in my students. I always try to take people and appreciate them at their best, because I know that, in my life, there have certainly been performances that I've regretted, and, things that I've wished that I'd prepared more for and so forth. But I think that when people are really, and it's not that often that it happens in our lives that we have that perfect confluence of all the factors, like the right environment, the right amount of practice time, the right repertoire, the right collaborators, that allow us to really play at our best.
Yeah.
But that's always how I like to remember people,
Yeah.
And that's also how I hope to be remembered by people who hear me.
I think that's such an important quality of a teacher, to see in their students their best.
I should also add that I think it's, part of the social media generation. It's a little regrettable that, now pretty much everything is recorded, right? So like, if a big player plays something out of tune, then, I remember I saw this awful video of awful, like really unfortunate and mean video of someone on Instagram who had like taken this clip from a A-list soloist violinist where they had like unfortunately flubbed a passage, and they slowed it down to like illustrate how many notes they had missed, and then they compared it to someone else.
That's terrible.
And I thought it was just really unfair because anyone can make a mistake, right? And also the fact that everything is recorded nowadays is so it's actually so detrimental in many ways to us as performers, because it doesn't give us as much room to experiment and explore and take risks in our playing. So
that's awful.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
And it had a lot of likes.
Of course it did. Because,
Unfortunately.
Of course it did, because I think it really turns it, unfortunately, and we'll talk about social media in a second. It sort of takes what we do and creates this viral circus out of something that has so much deep intent and thought and creativity. Speaking of social media, I mean, I don't think today you can, unfortunately, and also fortunately, be a successful artist without having at least a little bit of presence. You have a presence on social media. You have a fairly large one. What role does that play in your musical life, and how, if it does, seep into your teaching and performing?
I think it's a lot of mental real estate. Think about like, okay, what am I going to post? When do I actually prepare for this post? Because you often have to practice in a different way for it, and you have to set up the camera angle, and like, it's a lot of thinking. Like for a 60-second video, you probably expend at least an hour of your time thinking about it, if you want to get it to a certain level,
Of course.
And it does, it does feel sometimes like it's taking away time from, what you actually want to do, which is like, improve your playing and all this stuff, which is adjacent to that, but it's not exactly that.
Yeah.
And the other thing about social media is that, I've found, and, maybe it's just a little too much my cynical side, but the algorithm is designed to reward videos that quickly catch your attention.
Yes.
But in a way where they catch your attention just long enough, and then you feel addicted and need something else, right? So posting a clip of, like, I remember, like, I posted, this video, like, where I played a little bit of the Blue Danube Waltz in a Squid Game mask. Like, have you seen Squid Game?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I posted like, I bought like a Squid Game mask from Amazon.
Oh, cool.
And, like, I posted it, and it was like my highest liked video ever.
Of course it was, yeah.
And then like a few months later, I posted like this Bach clip that I was like really proud of. Like, I'd practiced so much, and it got like 1/20th the amount of attention,
I've been there. I have been there, trust me. Yep.
And it's just unfortunate that the algorithm rewards stuff that's less substantial. And I think that is actually a problem with its relationship to classical music, because what we do is substantial.
Yes.
And it's hard to reduce that to a 30-second clip.
Yeah.
It requires more attention than that.
Yeah.
So there's a conflict there, but of course, you still use it to try to reach out and connect to your audience. And there's nothing better than, going to a concert and then having someone come up to you and say, I found you on Instagram, and I saw your concert here, and I came, and they bought a ticket, and some people have traveled like hours to see me play, and so of course there are many good things about it, but it's an ambivalent relationship.
Of course, there's good and evil in social media. I think one really beautiful thing about what we about classical music and social media is the fact that, even if you get 1/20th of the views, perhaps someone out there who hasn't been to a concert or who doesn't really know much about cello sees your video.
Right.
And is like, wow, what a cool piece. Or, you know, I've had a very tricky relationship with social media over the years and sharing classical music, and I've had those experiences where I do something stupid and it gets 5 million views.
Right.
But, you know, those moments where someone goes to your concert or, you know, someone discovers a piece that they've never heard before, it brings classical music to the masses. I wish that our industry was more accessible and concerts were cheaper, and you know, that's a whole other issue that we don't need to get into, but social media, you know, I think it can be a vehicle for that. But I also agree that the algorithm really really sucks. How are you defining artistic success this year for yourself? What would you say future you hopes that you prioritize right now?
I would define artistic success as feeling like every concert that I play, every musical project that I take on is something that feels rewarding at the end. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a surprisingly difficult metric to fulfill.
Yeah.
Because, you know, just the nature of our industry, there are a lot of things that you might do for, you know, reasons that are not exactly artistic fulfillment, whether it be the money or the prestige or, you know, because you feel obliged to work with a particular person that you want to get to know or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I feel is, you know, a priority for me now to like move more toward doing things that I really want to do. Mm-hmm. And so that would be my priority going forward as well. Like programming concerts with repertoire that I really want to play. Only learning things that I really feel are worth the investment.
Yeah.
Only working up things that I've played before that I really want to play again. You know, these kinds of questions. So,
yeah. What do you want your legacy to be? How do you want to be? I mean, not to get morbid, it's not about that. I don't know, when someone says your name in 30, 40, 50 years, how do you want to be remembered?
Oh gosh. Such a difficult question, but I would say that I would like to write more music for the cello.
Okay.
And I think that the tradition of the cellist performers who we still play today because of the music they wrote, like Popper and Servet, I think that should have a comeback soon. And I hope in some ways to be a part of that tradition.
Thank you so much for such an engaging and intellectually stimulating and inspiring conversation for me, for our audiences. And I hope you all enjoyed this true masterclass, really. And thank you for being here with us, with IMSLP, with me.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to IMSLP for everything it gives me on a daily basis.
Yes. Thank you, IMSLP, because I'm not IMSLP, but thank you for watching Practice Room Breaks with IMSLP. We'll see you next time.